Hello Year 9 and welcome to this short lesson about the primary and secondary effects of tectonic hazards. This lesson is going to focus on the earthquake which happened in Nepal in 2015, but tectonic hazards include volcanic events too, like this one. Nepal is a country which is between India to the south and China to the north, and it's in the Himalayas, which is a mountain range which is being forced up as the Indian and Eurasian plates collide with each other. As you can see, Nepal is a spectacularly beautiful place as a consequence of its location on this plate margin, but because it's on a plate margin, it's also at risk of tectonic hazards like earthquakes. Now, Nepal is a low-income country, an LIC, with many of its population living in poverty. And as you can see, the quality of its buildings and structures is really very poor. When an earthquake hit in 2015, the poor building quality made the secondary effects much worse than you might expect in a high-income country, which has high standards of building and engineering. It's really important to remember that the primary effects of tectonic activity are the things that happen during or immediately after a tectonic event like an earthquake. The secondary effects are knock-on effects which happen later, and they happen because of the primary effects. Right, this table shows some of the primary effects of the earthquake which hit Nepal in 2015. I'd like you to take a moment to think carefully for each effect. What do you think the knock-on secondary effects will be for each one? Okay, let's go through them one by one. So the first effect of the earthquake was the loss of human life. 9,000 people died in this earthquake, and the knock-on effect of that is going to be, firstly, the tremendous suffering and grief which is caused to the families and friends of those people. That's going to be a social effect, the actual effect on the population after all of those people have been killed. You might also say, well, there's going to be an effect of those people no longer being able to go to work, those people having to go to hospital. You could even say that it's going to have an effect on like the morgues, the places where they deal with the dead. They're going to be overrun by having so many people that they're going to have to be dealing with all of a sudden. The next primary effect was that 800,000 homes were destroyed, and that means that 3 million people ended up living in tents, and there was a huge cost to rebuild all of those homes. Again, you can see immediately as the earth was shaking, 800,000 homes are destroyed. The knock-on effect of that is people are then homeless. Okay, the next one, temples were destroyed, so people don't have, therefore, a place of worship. Another point is that a lot of tourists go to visit these temples, so there's going to be less income from tourism after these temples are destroyed. Okay, during all of the shaking, one of the immediate impacts of that, the immediate effect, was going to be that hospitals were destroyed, and roughly half of the hospitals in Nepal were destroyed as the earth was shaking, as the earthquake was happening. The secondary effect of that, the knock-on, because there's less hospitals, you're unable to help the casualties, the people that have been hurt and injured in the earthquake. They can't get any help. The hospitals aren't able to operate, and you're going to have more deaths because of that. Imagine someone, they've got really bad, terrible injury, they've been trapped under rubble in the earthquake, and then they can't get to a hospital quickly enough. You're going to have more deaths, more casualties. Okay, this is an interesting one. 50% of the schools were immediately destroyed by the earthquake. Now, the secondary effects of that are going to be quite long lasting. You're going to firstly have children without education, and then further on down the line, further knock-on effects of that are going to be, that's going to have an impact on their future careers. Even further than that, if it's going to impact those children and their ability to earn money later on, maybe they're not able to get as good a career, they're not then going to be able to contribute to Nepal and help build Nepal up. They're also, if they're going to be earning less money, they're going to be paying less taxes. So Nepal as a whole society of people are going to suffer as a consequence, as a knock-on effect of the primary effect, which is that 50% of the schools were destroyed. Okay, next, landslides happened immediately. You can imagine all of the shaking. It's a mountainous region that was caused a lot of instability, and you had huge landslides. And the secondary effect of that was that the Everest base camp, Mount Everest is in Nepal, and the Everest base camp was damaged. Now, lots of people visit Nepal just to go to Mount Everest and to visit the base camp. So this had a negative impact on tourism. Okay, another primary effect was that electricity was cut off. This happened almost immediately with all of the shaking. Wires were cut, and there are lots of remote villages. Lots of people live in remote areas in Nepal, up high in the mountains, very isolated, and they were left without electricity. So the secondary effect of that, people are going to be unable to cook. They don't have electricity. They might not have any other means of cooking, and without electricity, they didn't have light. They can't charge search lights. They can't charge satellite phones, mobile phones, that type of thing, and that's going to have a really big impact on the search and rescue and coordinating the search and rescue effort. And finally, the last primary impact during the shaking, because of landslides, because of collapses and building damage and road damage, the roads were damaged. So what's the secondary effect of that going to be? Well, people can't get supplies. They might be, again, in remote areas, and they can't get food delivered to them. They can't have water delivered to them. Maybe they cook with gas and they can't get gas bottles delivered to them. So that's going to cause a secondary effect, a knock-on effect, which means that then people are going to be struggling for food and water. Right, let's have a quick look at how we might answer a question about this. Now, a typical question which will come up about primary and secondary effects is this: to what extent are primary effects worse than secondary effects? So essentially, the question is asking you something like this: do you agree that primary effects are worse than secondary effects, and why do you think that? So if we go back and have a look, having a look at those different effects, the effects of the primary effects, on the whole, do you think that those are worse than the secondary effects, or do you think that the primary effects lead to worse secondary effects? And because it's a question which is asking you to what extent, you're essentially having to assess that. So you need to create a balanced argument. So you're going to be giving both sides of the argument, having a look at some primary effects and then a secondary effect. And then at the end, you need to have a conclusion. So on the whole, after considering both primary effects and secondary effects, I think that primary effects or secondary effects are worse. Okay? So to sorry. So to really get the high marks, what you might need to do is you would need to mention a case study like Nepal, which now that we've gone through it, you'll be able to do. So you can go back, use this video to help you to write an answer, to have a go at writing an answer to this question. Okay, what do you think is worse? Just write down have a look at the different effects, and which do you think is worse, and why do you think it? Go for it.